Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried another heavy tray of food through the crowded mess hall. The metal plates clinked together as she moved between the long tables filled with soldiers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her uniform was already stained from the morning rush. She had been working at Fort Braxton for 3 months now, serving meals to hundreds of soldiers every day. It was honest work and it paid the bills, but nobody really noticed her. She was just another face behind the serving line, ladling out mashed potatoes and green beans with a polite smile. The job was harder than most people thought. The trays were heavy, the kitchen was hot, and the soldiers were always hungry and impatient. Sarah's arms ached by the end of each shift, but she never complained. She needed this job more than anyone knew. What the other workers didn't know was that Sarah had secrets. Big secrets. The kind that could change everything if the wrong person found out. She kept her head down and her mouth shut, just trying to blend in with the other cafeteria workers. Every morning, Sarah would arrive early and put on her serving uniform. The long sleeves covered her arms completely, which was exactly how she wanted it. She would tie her apron tight and take her place behind the counter, ready to serve breakfast to whatever soldiers came through the line. The mess hall was always noisy. Soldiers would joke and laugh while they ate, talking about their training exercises and weekend plans. Sarah would listen sometimes, but she never joined in the conversations. She had learned long ago that it was safer to stay quiet and invisible. Today started like any other day. Sarah was serving scrambled eggs and bacon to a line of young recruits who barely looked old enough to shave. They were chatty and excited, probably new to the base. She smiled and filled their plates, making small talk about the weather. "Thanks, ma'am," one of the recruits said politely. Sarah nodded and moved on to the next person in line. She had served maybe 50 people already, and it wasn't even 8 in the morning yet. The kitchen staff worked like a well-oiled machine. Martha, the head cook, barked orders from behind the grill while the other workers kept the serving line stocked with fresh food. Sarah had found her rhythm quickly when she started the job. She was good at staying focused and moving efficiently. But as she reached for another tray of hash browns, something went wrong. The metal tray was hotter than she expected, and she jerked her hand back instinctively. The sudden movement caused her sleeve to ride up her arm, exposing several inches of skin. For just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, part of her left forearm was visible. But 3 seconds was enough for someone to see what she had been hiding all this time. Sarah quickly pulled her sleeve back down and glanced around nervously. Most of the soldiers were busy eating and talking. Nobody seemed to have noticed anything unusual. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. She told herself she was being paranoid. It had happened so fast that probably nobody saw anything. Even if someone had glanced her way at that exact moment, they might not have gotten a good look. She needed to stop worrying and get back to work, but Sarah was wrong. Someone had been watching her very carefully at that exact moment. Someone with trained eyes who noticed details that other people missed. Someone who recognized exactly what he had seen on her arm. Colonel James Patterson had been walking through the mess hall, checking on the morning operations like he did every few days. He was a tall, imposing man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. The colonel had been in the military for over 20 years, and he had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. As he passed by the serving line, his attention was drawn to the woman serving hash browns. There was something about the way she moved, something familiar that he couldn't quite place. He paused and watched her for a moment, trying to figure out what had caught his attention. That's when it happened. That's when her sleeve slipped up and he saw it. The tattoo on her forearm was only visible for a few seconds, but those few seconds changed everything. Colonel Patterson's eyes widened slightly and he felt his pulse quicken. He knew that tattoo. He knew exactly what it meant and who was qualified to have it. The small, intricate design wasn't just any tattoo. It was a symbol that only a select few people in the entire world were authorized to wear. A symbol that represented years of the most intense training imaginable. The colonel stood perfectly still, studying the woman more carefully now. She had pulled her sleeve back down and was continuing to serve food as if nothing had happened. But Colonel Patterson's mind was racing. If he was right about what he had just seen, then this cafeteria worker was not who she appeared to be. He watched her movements more closely now, looking for other signs. The way she stood, the way she scanned the room, the way she held herself even while doing something as simple as serving food. Everything about her suggested military training, and not just basic training either. Colonel Patterson had spent his entire career around elite soldiers. He could spot them even when they were trying to hide, And this woman, whoever she really was, had definitely been one of them. The question was why she was now working in a mess hall instead of leading special operations missions. The colonel knew he needed to be careful. If this woman was who he thought she might be, then there was probably a very good reason why she was keeping her identity secret. He couldn't just walk up to her and start asking questions in front of dozens of soldiers. Instead, he made a mental note of her schedule and decided to do some investigating. He would find out who this mysterious cafeteria worker really was, and why someone with her apparent background was hiding behind a serving line. Colonel Patterson had a feeling that this was going to be a very interesting case. Colonel Patterson spent the rest of the morning thinking about what he had seen. The tattoo was burned into his memory now, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. After finishing his rounds, he headed straight to his office to do some research. He sat down at his computer and pulled up the personnel files for all the cafeteria workers. There weren't many of them, and most had been working on the base for years. But when he got to Sarah Martinez's file, he found something interesting. She had only been hired 3 months ago, and her background check was surprisingly thin. According to her paperwork, Sarah had worked at various restaurants and cafeterias before coming to Fort Braxton. Her references checked out, but something felt off to the colonel. The file was too clean, too simple. Most people had messier work histories with gaps and complications. Sarah's file read like it had been carefully constructed. The colonel leaned back in his chair and thought about the tattoo again. It was a small eagle with wings spread over crossed arrows, surrounded by 13 stars. Most people would think it was just a patriotic design, but Colonel Patterson knew better. That particular tattoo was only given to members of an elite special forces unit that didn't officially exist. He had worked with that unit once, years ago, on a classified mission overseas. The soldiers in that group were the best of the best, handpicked from various special forces branches and trained to handle the most dangerous assignments. They operated in complete secrecy, and their identities were protected at the highest levels. But if Sarah Martinez was really a member of that unit, what was she doing serving food at a military base? And why was she hiding her identity? The colonel knew that Special Forces soldiers sometimes went undercover for various reasons, but this situation didn't make sense. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The person on the other end answered after 2 rings. General Morrison's office. "This is Colonel Patterson at Fort Braxton. I need to speak with the general about a sensitive matter." There was a pause. "I'll see if he's available, sir." A few minutes later, General Morrison came on the line. The 2 men had served together in Iraq and had maintained a friendship over the years. Morrison now worked in Washington dealing with classified special operations. "Jim, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need some information about a tattoo," Colonel Patterson said carefully. "The eagle and arrows design from the Phoenix unit." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When General Morrison spoke again, his voice was much more serious. "That's a very specific question, Jim. Why are you asking?" "I think I might have spotted someone with that tattoo working in my mess hall. Someone who's supposed to be a civilian cafeteria worker." "That's impossible," Morrison said quickly. "All Phoenix operatives are accounted for. Their locations are tracked for security reasons." "I know what I saw," Patterson insisted. "The tattoo was only visible for a few seconds, but I'm certain of what it was." General Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Give me a name." "Sarah Martinez. She's been working here for 3 months. I'll need to make some calls. This conversation never happened, understand? I'll get back to you within 24 hours. The line went dead, leaving Colonel Patterson staring at his phone. He had a feeling he had just opened a very complicated can of worms. Meanwhile, Sarah was finishing her shift in the kitchen, completely unaware that her cover had been blown. She cleaned the serving trays and helped Martha prepare for the lunch rush. It was routine work, but it kept her mind occupied. As she was hanging up her apron, Martha called out to her. "Sarah, honey, you've been looking tired lately. You sure you're getting enough sleep?" Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, just adjusting to the schedule still." The truth was that Sarah barely slept anymore. She had nightmares most nights, flashbacks to missions that she couldn't talk about with anyone. The therapists at the VA hospital had tried to help, but they didn't understand what she had been through. How could they? Her missions were classified at levels that most doctors would never have clearance to know about. She walked to her car, a beat-up Honda that she had bought with cash. As she drove home to her small apartment, Sarah thought about how different her life was now compared to just 6 months ago. Back then, she had been leading a team of highly trained soldiers on dangerous missions in foreign countries. Now she was serving mashed potatoes to young recruits. The change hadn't been her choice. After her last mission went wrong, she had been quietly discharged from the Phoenix unit and given a new identity. The official story was that she had never existed in the first place. All records of her military service had been erased or classified, so deeply that even she couldn't access them anymore. She had been given a modest pension and a promise that she would be left alone if she kept quiet about her past. The government had even helped her get the job at Fort Braxton, thinking it would be ironic justice to have a former Special Forces operator serving food to regular soldiers. But Sarah wasn't bitter about it. She was actually relieved to be out of that world. The constant danger and stress had been eating away at her for years. She had seen too many friends die, completed too many missions that kept her awake at night. When the opportunity came to disappear and start over, she had taken it gladly. Her apartment was small but comfortable. She had furnished it simply with just the basics she needed. No photographs, no mementos from her old life. The only reminder of who she used to be was the tattoo on her arm, and she kept that hidden under long sleeves every day. As she made dinner, Sarah thought about her co-workers in the kitchen. They were good people who had accepted her without asking too many questions. Martha treated her like a daughter, and the other workers included her in their conversations about families and weekend plans. It was the first time in years that Sarah had felt like she belonged somewhere normal. She didn't know that at that very moment. Colonel Patterson was sitting in his office waiting for a phone call that would change both of their lives. She didn't know that her carefully constructed new identity was about to be exposed by someone who recognized the significance of a tattoo that was only visible for 3 seconds. All Sarah knew was that for the first time in years, she was starting to feel like maybe she could have a normal life. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't find out until tomorrow. The next morning, Colonel Patterson arrived at his office earlier than usual. He had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about Sarah Martinez and what her presence at his base might mean. At exactly 7 o'clock, his secure phone rang. Colonel Patterson. Jim, it's Morrison. We need to talk, but not over the phone. I'm flying down there today. Don't approach the woman until I arrive. What did you find out? More than I expected and less than I hoped. I'll be there by noon. Meet me at Building 7, Conference Room B, and Jim, this stays between us for now. The colonel spent the morning trying to focus on his regular duties, but his eyes kept drifting toward the mess hall. He could see Sarah through the windows, serving breakfast to the morning shift. She looked so ordinary, so harmless. It was hard to believe that she might be one of the most highly trained soldiers he had ever encountered. General Morrison arrived exactly at noon, accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Agent Williams. They met in the secure conference room away from prying eyes and ears. Morrison got straight to the point. The woman you saw is Captain Sarah Elena Martinez, formerly of the Phoenix Special Operations Unit. She was officially discharged 6 months ago after a mission in Syria went bad. What kind of bad? Patterson asked. Agent Williams opened a classified folder. Her team was sent to extract a high-value target from a terrorist compound. Intelligence was wrong about the security situation. What should have been a quick in and out became a 12-hour firefight. 3 of her team members died, including her partner. The colonel felt a chill run down his spine. And Martinez? She completed the mission, Morrison continued. Got the target out and fought her way through enemy lines for 6 miles. But the experience broke something in her. She requested discharge and threatened to go public about Phoenix operations if we didn't let her disappear. So you gave her a new identity and stuck her in my mess hall? We gave her what she wanted, Agent Williams said defensively. A clean slate, a quiet job, a chance to heal. She signed agreements to never discuss her past, and in return, we erased all records of her service. Patterson shook his head. But now I've seen her tattoo. Your security is compromised. Morrison leaned forward. That's why we're here. We need to know how much you saw, who else might have noticed, and what you plan to do about it. I saw enough to recognize what it was, and I don't think anyone else noticed. But now that I know who she is, I can't just pretend I don't. Agent Williams pulled out another file. Captain Martinez was one of our best operatives. She speaks 4 languages, has advanced medical training and completed over 50 successful missions. Her psychological evaluation shows severe PTSD, but she's not considered a security risk. What does that mean exactly? It means she's not going to sell secrets or go rogue, Morrison explained. She just wants to be left alone. The question is whether you can respect that. Colonel Patterson stood up and walked to the window. He could see soldiers training in the distance. Young men and women who had no idea that one of the most decorated special forces operatives in the country was serving them lunch every day. What if I hadn't noticed the tattoo? He asked. Then she would have continued working here until she felt ready to move on. Williams replied. Maybe that would have been in a few months, maybe a few years. She was finally starting to sleep through the night. The colonel turned back to them. You've been monitoring her? Basic wellness checks, Morrison said. We have a responsibility to our former operatives, even the ones who want to disappear. She's been seeing a therapist, taking medication for anxiety, slowly getting better. Patterson felt a weight settling on his shoulders. By recognizing that tattoo, he had potentially disrupted the recovery of a soldier who had sacrificed everything for her country. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore what he knew. I want to talk to her, he said finally. Absolutely not, Williams responded immediately. Any contact could trigger a psychological episode. She's been very clear that she doesn't want any connection to her former life. But she's living a lie, Patterson argued, working alongside people who have no idea who she really is. That can't be healthy either. Morrison stood up. Jim, I'm asking you as a friend to let this go. Martinez has earned the right to choose her own path. She served her country with distinction, and she paid a heavy price for it. If you expose her now, you could destroy the only peace she's found. The colonel thought about his own experiences in combat, the soldiers he had lost, the weight of command decisions that kept him awake some nights. He could understand why someone would want to walk away from that world. But he also thought about the young soldiers in his mess hall, eating food served by someone who had fought battles they couldn't imagine. There was something profound about that connection, even if they didn't know it existed. I need time to think about this, Patterson said. You have until tomorrow morning, Williams told him. We need to know your decision so we can plan accordingly. And if I decide I can't keep this secret? Morrison's expression grew serious. Then we'll have to relocate Martinez again, give her another new identity, move her somewhere else. It would set her recovery back months, maybe years. After the general and agent left, Colonel Patterson sat alone in the conference room for a long time. Through the window, he could see the mess hall where Sarah was probably cleaning up after the lunch rush, unaware that her carefully constructed new life was hanging in the balance. He thought about duty and honor, about the obligation soldiers had to each other. Sarah Martinez had served her country faithfully, and now she was asking for something simple, the right to serve mashed potatoes and try to forget the nightmares that haunted her sleep. But Colonel Patterson also thought about truth and honesty, about the weight of carrying secrets that could affect other people. He wondered if Sarah would be better off if she could stop hiding, if she could find a way to integrate her past with her present instead of running from it. As the afternoon wore on, he realized he was facing one of the hardest decisions of his military career. And unlike most military decisions, this one had no clear right answer. That evening, Colonel Patterson found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Instead of going home to his empty house, he walked to the base recreation center and sat in the parking lot, watching Sarah Martinez as she left work for the day. She walked to her old Honda with the careful awareness that most people wouldn't notice, but that Patterson recognized immediately. Even in civilian clothes, even pretending to be just another cafeteria worker, she moved like someone who had been trained to expect danger from any direction. As she drove away, the colonel made a decision that would have horrified General Morrison and Agent Williams. He followed her. Sarah's apartment complex was modest, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. Patterson parked across the street and watched as she climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit. Through her window, he could see her moving around inside, probably making dinner for one. The colonel sat in his car for 2 hours, thinking about everything Morrison and Williams had told him. Sarah Martinez was trying to heal from wounds that went deeper than anything physical. She had found a small measure of peace serving food to soldiers who didn't know her story. Was it his right to disrupt that? But as he watched her apartment, Patterson noticed something that bothered him. Sarah never turned on any lights in the front of her apartment. She stayed in what must have been the back rooms away from the windows. Even now, months after leaving her old life behind, she was still living like someone who expected to be hunted. The next morning, Colonel Patterson arrived at his office with a plan that he knew was risky. He had decided not to report his decision to Morrison and Williams yet. Instead, he was going to do something that went against their direct orders. He was going to talk to Sarah. He waited until the morning breakfast rush was over, then walked into the mess hall kitchen. Martha was directing the cleanup while Sarah and two other workers washed dishes and cleaned serving trays. "Ms. Martinez," the colonel said quietly, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah looked up from the dishes, surprised. In 3 months of working at the base, she had never had a direct conversation with Colonel Patterson. She dried her hands on her apron and followed him to a quiet corner of the kitchen. "Is there a problem with my work, sir?" she asked. Patterson studied her face carefully. Up close, he could see the subtle signs of someone who had been through combat. A small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room, the slight tension in her shoulders that never completely relaxed. "Yesterday morning, when you were serving hash browns, your sleeve slipped up for a moment," he said quietly. Sarah's face went completely pale. Her hand instinctively moved to cover her left forearm, even though it was hidden under her uniform sleeve. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," she said, but her voice wasn't quite steady. "The eagle and arrows tattoo," Patterson said gently. 13 stars. "I know what it means." For a moment, Sarah looked like she might faint. Then her military training kicked in, and her expression became carefully neutral. "I think you're mistaken, Colonel. I'm just a cafeteria worker. Captain Sarah Elena Martinez, Phoenix Special Operations Unit, Syria mission 6 months ago. 3 KIA, including your partner." Sarah's careful composure cracked. She glanced around the kitchen frantically, making sure no one else could hear their conversation. Martha and the other workers were busy with their own tasks, paying no attention to them. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "I made some calls." "The question is, what do we do now?" Sarah's hands were shaking slightly. "You're going to turn me in, aren't you? They'll move me again, give me another name, another fake life." "That depends on you," Patterson said. "I'm supposed to report this to my superiors. But I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" The colonel looked around the kitchen at the normal, everyday activity of people preparing food and cleaning up. It was such a contrast to the world that both he and Sarah had come from. "Because I think you're running from something that you can't outrun forever. And I think pretending to be someone you're not isn't really helping you heal." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "You don't understand. The things I did, the people who died because of my decisions, I can't carry that and still function in the normal world. But you're not functioning," Patterson pointed out gently. "You're hiding. There's a difference. This job, these people, it's the first time in years that I've felt human again. Please don't take that away from me." The colonel could see the genuine fear in her eyes, and it made his decision even harder. But he also saw something else, a flicker of the strong, capable soldier she had been before trauma broke her spirit. "What if there was another way?" he asked. "What if you didn't have to choose between hiding who you are and being destroyed by your past?" "What do you mean?" Patterson looked around the kitchen again, making sure they weren't being overheard. "I have an idea, but it would require you to trust me. And it would mean being honest with at least some people about who you really are." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the decision. Finally she spoke. "The last time I trusted someone with the truth about a mission, 3 of my team members died. I'm not good at trust anymore." "I understand that. But Captain Martinez, Sarah, whoever you want to be called, you can't spend the rest of your life serving hash browns and pretending you never existed. You're too good a soldier for that." "I'm not a soldier anymore," she said firmly. "I'm just Sarah Martinez from the cafeteria." "No," Patterson said gently. "You're Captain Sarah Martinez, who served her country with honor and paid a heavy price for it. And you deserve better than living in the shadows." Before Sarah could respond, Martha called out from across the kitchen. "Sarah, honey, you okay over there? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah forced a smile and waved. "I'm fine, Martha. Just discussing some schedule changes with the colonel." Patterson lowered his voice even more. "Think about what I said. I'm not going to report this conversation to anyone yet, but we need to find a solution that doesn't involve you running away again. And if I say no, if I ask you to just forget what you saw," the colonel was quiet for a moment, Then I'll have to decide whether my duty is to protect your secret or to report what I know. Either way, this situation can't continue as it is." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the position she was in. "How long do I have to decide?" "Take the time you need. But Sarah, whatever you decide, remember that you're not alone in this. There are people who understand what you've been through." As Colonel Patterson walked away, Sarah stood in the kitchen feeling like her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. For months she had felt safe behind her false identity. Now that safety was gone, and she had to decide whether to run again or face the truth about who she really was. That night Sarah barely slept. She lay in her small apartment bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Colonel Patterson's words. For 6 months she had convinced herself that hiding was healing, but now someone had forced her to question whether she was actually getting better or just getting better at pretending. She thought about her last mission in Syria, the one that had ended everything. Her team had been sent to extract Dr. Hassan al-Rashid, a scientist who had information about chemical weapons being developed by terrorists. The intelligence report said the compound would be lightly guarded, that they could get in and out quickly. But the intelligence was wrong. The compound was a trap, filled with heavily armed fighters who had been waiting for them. What should have been a 30-minute extraction became a 12-hour battle for survival. Sarah could still remember every detail of that night. The way Sergeant Rodriguez looked when the sniper's bullet found him, how Corporal Jenkins died trying to carry their wounded communications specialist to safety, the sound of her partner, Lieutenant David Chen, calling her name as he bled out in her arms. She had gotten Dr. al-Rashid out alive, along with 2 other members of her team. The mission was considered a success by the people who wrote the reports. But Sarah knew the truth. She had failed her team. Her decisions had gotten good soldiers killed. After that night, she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function as a soldier. The nightmares came every night, and during the day she jumped at unexpected sounds. Her commanding officers tried to help, sending her to military therapists and giving her time to recover. But Sarah knew she was broken in a way that couldn't be fixed with counseling and medication. When the opportunity came to disappear, to start over with a clean slate, she had grabbed it like a lifeline. For 6 months, she had been Sarah Martinez, the cafeteria worker, not Captain Martinez, the Special Forces operative who had watched her friends die. But now Colonel Patterson was asking her to remember who she used to be. And the scary thing was, part of her wanted to. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early, hoping to avoid the colonel until she had figured out what to do. But he was already there, sitting at a corner table in the mess hall with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. Their eyes met briefly as she walked to the kitchen, and he nodded slightly. It wasn't threatening or demanding, just a quiet acknowledgement that they both knew their conversation wasn't finished. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering. As she served breakfast to the young soldiers, she found herself really looking at them for the first time in months. They were so young, some of them probably only 18 or 19 years old. They reminded her of the soldiers she used to lead, back when she believed she could keep them all safe. During her break, Sarah walked outside to get some fresh air. She was surprised to find Colonel Patterson waiting by the picnic tables near the kitchen. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him without any greeting. "And?" Sarah sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee to stop them from shaking. "You're right that I'm not really healing. I'm just hiding, but I don't know how to do anything else anymore. What scares you most about people knowing who you really are? That they'll expect me to be someone I'm not anymore. That they'll think I'm some kind of hero when I know I'm just someone who failed when it mattered most." Patterson leaned forward. "What if I told you that failure doesn't erase everything good you've done? That the soldiers you saved matter just as much as the ones you lost?" "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I made the tactical decisions that night. I chose the entry point, I assigned the positions, I called the retreat order too late. David died because I wasn't good enough to save him." "David Chen was your partner?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "We were supposed to get married when we got back from that deployment. He proposed 3 weeks before the mission." Colonel Patterson was quiet, letting her talk. "He believed in me, trusted my judgment completely, and I got him killed." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "How am I supposed to live with that and still pretend to be a normal person?" "By accepting that you're human," Patterson said gently. By understanding that being a good soldier doesn't mean being perfect, it means doing your best in impossible situations. My best wasn't good enough. Your best saved lives. Dr. Al-Rashid is still alive because of you. The chemical weapons intelligence he provided has prevented attacks that could have killed thousands of people. That matters. Sarah had never thought about it that way. For 6 months, she had focused only on the 3 soldiers who died, not on the lives that were saved because of their sacrifice. I have a proposal, Colonel Patterson said. Something that might help both of us. What do you mean? This base has a problem. We're training young soldiers for combat, but most of their instructors have never actually been in a real firefight. They know the theory, but they don't know what it's really like when the bullets start flying. Sarah looked at him skeptically. You want me to teach them about combat? I want you to teach them about survival, about making decisions under pressure, about taking care of their team members and themselves when everything goes wrong. I can't do that, Sarah said immediately. I can't stand up in front of a group of soldiers and pretend to be an expert when I failed so badly. You wouldn't be pretending. You'd be sharing real experience, including the mistakes and failures. That's exactly what these kids need to hear. Sarah thought about the young recruits she served every morning, with their eager faces and their confidence that they were invincible. They had no idea what they might face in the real world. It would mean telling people who I really am, she said. Not everyone. Just a few people who need to know. We could start small, maybe work with some of the advanced training groups. You wouldn't have to reveal everything about your past. And in return, you get to use your skills to help other soldiers instead of hiding from them. You get to honor the memory of your team by making sure other teams are better prepared. Sarah was quiet for a long time, thinking about David and Rodriguez and Jenkins. They had died believing in the mission, trusting that their sacrifice meant something. Maybe Patterson was right that their deaths could still save lives even now. I would need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course. But Sarah, I want you to know that I've read your service record. All of it. You're one of the most decorated soldiers I've ever encountered. The tragedy of your last mission doesn't erase all the missions where you brought everyone home safely. How many successful missions? 52. In 8 years of service, you completed 52 successful special operations missions with minimal casualties. Your team members trusted you because you earned that trust over and over again. Sarah felt something shift inside her just slightly. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to remember some of the good missions, the times when her decisions had saved lives instead of costing them. If I agreed to this, what would happen to my job in the kitchen? You could keep it if you wanted to, or we could find you a position that better matches your qualifications. But Sarah, whatever you decide about the teaching, you can't keep pretending to be someone you're not. Idiot. 3 days later, Sarah found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with 20 advanced trainees. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept checking to make sure her sleeves covered her tattoo. Colonel Patterson had introduced her simply as Sarah Martinez, a consultant with special operations experience who would be sharing some practical survival techniques. The soldiers looked eager and confident, just like she had been at their age. Most of them were in their early 20s, preparing for deployment to various overseas assignments. They had completed basic training and advanced combat courses, but they had never been in actual combat. How many of you think you're ready for war? Sarah asked as her opening question. Every hand in the room went up immediately. Sarah had expected that response. Good. Keep that confidence because you'll need it. But today I want to talk to you about something your other instructors probably haven't covered. What happens when everything goes wrong? For the next hour, Sarah shared techniques for surviving in hostile territory when communications were down, when you were separated from your unit, when the mission plan fell apart completely. She talked about field medicine, about making decisions under extreme stress, about the importance of staying calm when your world was exploding around you. She was surprised to find that teaching came naturally to her. The soldiers asked good questions and listened intently to her answers. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was doing something that mattered, but she carefully avoided sharing any personal stories. She spoke in general terms about combat situations, never mentioning specific missions or her own experiences. The students didn't seem to notice the omission, but Sarah felt like she was only giving them half of what they needed. After the class, she walked back to the mess hall feeling conflicted. The teaching had felt good, but she knew she was still holding back. How could she really prepare these soldiers for combat if she wasn't willing to share the hard truths about what it was actually like? Martha was waiting for her in the kitchen, arms crossed and wearing an expression that Sarah recognized. It was the look Martha got when she knew someone was keeping secrets. "Honey, we need to talk," Martha said firmly, "and don't even think about lying to me. I've been watching you for 3 months and I know when something's up." Sarah's heart sank. She had been so focused on Colonel Patterson and the teaching opportunity that she hadn't thought about how to handle the people she worked with every day. "Martha, sit down," Martha commanded, pointing to a chair at the prep table. "I saw you crying outside with the colonel the other day. I saw you disappear for an hour today to go who knows where, and I've been watching you since the day you started here." Sarah sat down reluctantly, feeling like a child being scolded by her mother. "You want to know what I think?" Martha continued. "I think you're military. Or you were military. You move like my son did when he came back from Afghanistan. You know things that restaurant workers don't know. And you've got that look in your eyes that soldiers get when they've seen too much." Sarah stared at Martha in shock. She had thought her disguise was perfect. "But here's the thing, honey," Martha said, her voice getting gentler. "I don't care what you used to do or what you're running from. You're a good person, and you've become like family to me. So whatever's happening now, whatever that colonel wants from you, I want you to know that you're not alone." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. For 6 months, she had been terrified that people would reject her if they knew the truth. But Martha was offering unconditional support without even knowing what she was supporting. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "I was military, special forces, and I've been lying to everyone here about who I am. Why?" Sarah took a deep breath and told Martha the whole story. The Phoenix unit, the mission in Syria, the deaths of her team members, her discharge and new identity. She talked about the nightmares and the guilt, about trying to disappear and start over. Martha listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. When Sarah finished, the older woman reached across the table and took her hand. "Honey, you've been carrying this all by yourself for months. No wonder you look so tired all the time. I was afraid people would judge me if they knew, or that they'd expect me to be someone I'm not anymore. The only thing I expect from you is honesty," Martha said firmly, "and maybe some help figuring out how to tell the others without causing a big fuss. You're not angry that I lied?" "I'm angry that you felt like you had to lie," Martha corrected. "There's a difference." Over the next hour, Martha and Sarah worked out a plan for telling the other kitchen staff. They decided to keep it simple. Sarah had been in the military. She was dealing with some issues from her service, and she was now helping with training programs on the base. They didn't need to know about the Phoenix unit or the classified missions. The conversation with their co-workers went better than Sarah had expected. Tom, the head dishwasher, nodded and said it explained why she was so good at organizing the supply closet. Jenny, who worked the morning shift, thanked her for her service and offered to cover her shifts if she needed time for counseling. "You're still the same Sarah to us," Jenny said, "just Sarah with a more interesting backstory." Later that afternoon, Colonel Patterson stopped by the kitchen to check on how the day had gone. "The teaching went well," Sarah told him, "but I felt like I was holding back. They need to hear the real stories, not just the technical information. Are you ready to share those stories?" Sarah thought about the young soldiers in the classroom, about their confidence and eagerness. She thought about David and Rodriguez and Jenkins, and about the missions where her decisions had saved lives instead of costing them. "I think so. But I want to start with just one story. The Syria mission. If I'm going to help these soldiers understand what real combat is like, they need to hear about failure as much as success." Colonel Patterson nodded approvingly. "That takes real courage, Sarah. Or maybe it's just time to stop being a coward. You were never a coward. You were a soldier dealing with trauma in the only way you knew how." That evening, Sarah went home to her apartment and did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She pulled out a box from her closet that contained mementos from her military service. Photos of her team, letters from David, commendation medals that she had shoved away because they reminded her of everything she had lost. She spread the items out on her kitchen table and really looked at them for the first time since moving to Fort Braxton. There was a photo of her entire Phoenix unit taken just before the Syria deployment. David had his arm around her shoulders and Rodriguez was making a silly face at the camera. They all looked so young and confident, but for the first time, instead of just feeling grief when she looked at the photo, Sarah also felt something else: pride. They had been good soldiers, all of them. They had believed in their mission and in each other. The fact that some of them didn't come home didn't erase the good they had done. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized, but never called. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Mrs. Chen, this is Sarah Martinez. I served with your son David." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, David talked about you so much. We wondered what happened to you after the funeral." "I've been hiding," Sarah said honestly, "but I think it's time I stopped. I wanted to call and tell you about the last conversation I had with David, about how he talked about you and his father, and about how proud he was to serve." They talked for an hour, sharing memories of David and crying together over the phone. It was painful, but it was also healing in a way that hiding had never been. When she hung up, Sarah felt lighter somehow. She was still scared about facing her past, but she was no longer running from it. Tomorrow she would tell those young soldiers about the night when everything went wrong, and maybe her story would help them when they faced their own moments of crisis. For the first time in 6 months, Sarah Martinez felt like she might actually be ready to live again instead of just surviving. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a much larger classroom filled with over 100 soldiers from various units across Fort Braxton. Word had spread about her unconventional teaching methods, and commanders from multiple divisions had requested that their troops attend her sessions. She was no longer the nervous, trembling woman who had hidden behind a cafeteria serving line. Today she wore her military consultant uniform with confidence, and for the first time in over a year, her sleeves were rolled up, revealing the Phoenix unit tattoo that had started this entire journey. "Today we're going to talk about leadership under pressure," she began, her voice strong and clear. "And I'm going to tell you about the worst night of my military career, because that's when I learned the most important lessons about being responsible for other people's lives." The classroom was completely silent. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had built a reputation as an instructor who didn't sugarcoat the realities of combat. Soldiers respected her because she had been where they were going, and she wasn't afraid to share both her successes and her failures. Sarah told them about the Syria mission in detail. She described the faulty intelligence, the tactical decisions she made, the 12-hour firefight, and the 3 team members who didn't come home. She talked about the guilt and the nightmares, but also about the importance of learning from failure instead of being destroyed by it. "Leadership isn't about being perfect," she concluded. "It's about making the best decisions you can with the information you have, taking care of your people, and continuing to function when everything goes wrong. Sometimes good soldiers die despite your best efforts. That's the hardest truth about this job, but it's a truth you need to accept if you're going to lead others." After the session, a young lieutenant approached her with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, my unit deploys to Syria next month. I've been terrified about making a mistake that gets my soldiers killed." "That fear will keep you sharp," Sarah told him. "Use it. Let it remind you to double-check your intelligence, to have backup plans, to know your team members well enough to make split-second decisions about their capabilities. How do you live with the responsibility?" Sarah thought about David's parents, whom she now called regularly. She thought about Dr. al-Rashid, the scientist they had extracted whose intelligence had prevented 3 major terrorist attacks. She thought about the hundreds of soldiers she had trained over the past 6 months. "You live with it by remembering that the responsibility is a privilege," she said. "These soldiers trust you with their lives because they believe you'll do everything possible to bring them home. Honor that trust, learn from your mistakes, and never stop trying to be better." Later that afternoon, Sarah walked through the mess hall where she had once hidden behind a serving line. Martha was still there, now serving as head of food services, and she waved enthusiastically when she saw Sarah. "How'd the big class go, honey?" "Good, really good," Sarah smiled. "I think I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be." Colonel Patterson joined them carrying a folder of papers. Over the months, he had become not just Sarah's advocate but her friend. He understood the weight of military service in a way that few people could. "I have some news," he announced. "The Pentagon has approved funding for a new combat psychology program. They want you to help design curriculum for training soldiers to handle traumatic stress in the field." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it was different now. Instead of the paralyzing fear she used to feel, this was the normal nervousness that came with new challenges. "That sounds like a big responsibility." "It is. But Sarah, You've already proven that you can help soldiers prepare for the psychological realities of combat. This would let you do that on a much larger scale. Sarah thought about all the young faces she had seen in her classes over the past months. She thought about the letters she received from soldiers who had deployed and used techniques she had taught them. One Marine had written to thank her for teaching him breathing exercises that helped him stay calm during a firefight in Afghanistan. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "But yes, I'm interested." That evening, Sarah drove to the military cemetery where David and her other team members were buried. She visited their graves regularly now, bringing flowers and talking to them about her work and her life. It was part of her healing process, her way of staying connected to the people who had shaped her into the soldier she became. She sat by David's headstone and told him about the Pentagon offer, about the chance to help soldiers on a national level. "I think you'd be proud of me," she said quietly. "I'm not the broken person I was when I left Phoenix. I'm not the same person I was before Syria either. But I think I'm finally becoming someone who can live with both the good and the bad parts of our story." A gentle breeze rustled the trees around the cemetery, and Sarah took it as approval from her fallen team members. When she got home, she found a surprise waiting for her. Agent Williams, the woman who had originally wanted to keep her hidden, was sitting on the steps of her apartment building. "Captain Martinez," Williams said, standing up as Sarah approached. "It's just Sarah now. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Williams said. "And to thank you." "For what?" "For proving that we were wrong. We thought the best way to help you heal was to erase your past, but you've shown that healing comes from integrating your experiences, not hiding from them." Sarah unlocked her apartment door and invited Williams inside. The space was completely different from 6 months ago. Photos of her military unit were displayed proudly on the walls, along with letters from soldiers she had trained and certificates from the courses she had completed in combat psychology. "We have other former Phoenix operatives who are struggling like you were," Williams continued. "Men and women who feel like they can't function in the civilian world, but can't go back to their old units either. Would you be willing to work with them?" Sarah considered the request. She knew how isolating it felt to carry classified memories that you couldn't share with anyone. She knew the weight of survivor's guilt and the challenge of finding purpose after leaving elite military service. "I'd be honored to help them," she said, "but I have conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "No more fake identities. No more hiding who they are. If these people are going to heal, they need to find ways to integrate their military service with their civilian lives, not pretend their service never happened." Williams nodded. "I think we've learned that lesson." 2 weeks later, Sarah received official orders assigning her to a new position as Director of Combat Stress Preparation at the Pentagon. She would be designing training programs for the entire military, helping soldiers understand and prepare for the psychological challenges of modern warfare. On her last day at Fort Braxton, the entire mess hall staff threw her a goodbye party. Martha cried and made her promise to stay in touch. The soldiers she had trained presented her with a plaque that read, "To Captain Sarah Martinez, who taught us that true strength comes from facing our fears, not hiding from them." Colonel Patterson drove her to the airport, and they sat in his car for a few minutes before she had to catch her flight. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah thought about the question seriously. She thought about the pain of the past year, the struggle to rebuild her identity, the courage it had taken to face her trauma instead of running from it. "No regrets," she said finally. "Everything that happened, even the worst parts, led me to this moment. I wouldn't change any of it, not even the Syria mission, especially not the Syria mission. Rodriguez and Jenkins and David died believing in something important. The work I'm doing now honors their sacrifice in a way that hiding in a kitchen never could." As her plane took off from the small airport near Fort Braxton, Sarah looked down at the base where she had learned to stop running from her past and start building a future that included all of her experiences, both the triumphs and the failures. She was no longer the broken veteran who had sought refuge in anonymity. She was no longer the cocky Special Forces captain who had thought she could save everyone. She was Sarah Martinez, a woman who had learned that true healing comes not from forgetting your scars, but from learning to wear them with pride. In her briefcase, she carried the outline for her first Pentagon presentation. "Training tomorrow's leaders, preparing soldiers for the psychological realities of combat." It would draw on everything she had learned from her own trauma and recovery, everything she had discovered about the difference between hiding from pain and healing from it. Sarah smiled as the plane climbed toward Washington, D.C., where her new life was waiting. She was finally ready to help other soldiers find their way home from the darkness, just as Colonel Patterson and Martha, and even her fallen team members had helped her find her way home from hers. The tattoo on her arm, no longer hidden under long sleeves, caught the sunlight streaming through the airplane window. The eagle and arrows and 13 stars were no longer a symbol of shame and secrecy. They were a badge of honor, a reminder of service and sacrifice, and a promise that no soldier should have to carry their burdens alone.